Hi, I'm Justice Diodario from Renton Family Therapy,
And I'm Joe Broom.
here to talk to you today about flipping your lid. This is a model that Dan Siegel shares a lot, and Jane Nelson, who invented positive discipline, shares a lot, and Joe's going to walk us through it.
Yeah, the model is pretty simple. Uh, when we're in relationships, so often when there's conflict, um, it's really great to have a model to understand what's actually happening in the brain. And so we can start to get a little space from our reactivity, start to understand the process, and then do something different. So that's what this model is all about, the brain in the palm of the hand. So here's the basics of it. Basically, this is the brain facing forward, eyes here, brainstem coming up. Okay, so all information travels up through the spinal cord and enters the oldest part of the brain, also known as the reptilian brain. That part of the brain is responsible for basic survival, fight, flight, freeze. So it makes sense that the data would first be processed there. So that part of the brain is looking for danger and it's looking for trouble. If it senses trouble, something very important happens. They say, Jane Nelson and Dan Siegel say, for example, we flip our lid. And so the part of the brain that goes offline is the part of the brain that is responsible for all learning, basically. It gives us empathy, compassion, flexibility, the ability to kind of see someone else's perspective and reflect. So this is a pretty clear illustration for what happens in relationships when something happens and the brain doesn't know the difference between a lion chasing you kind of threat versus my girlfriend doesn't like the clothes that I'm wearing, right? And that's a sore spot for me from my past. And so it treats it all the same. And once that information is filtered through that threat monitoring system, that reptilian brain, and we lose this perspective, all heck breaks loose. So Justice is here drawing a little example of what happens. And essentially this is the cutoff that's occurring when we're triggered by the threat monitoring system. And when we're in that triggered state, the Justice has a great way of explaining it. There's three basic things that start happening.
So, when the Threat Monitoring Center says, is it safe, and it says no, like Joe's saying, we're cut off from the prefrontal cortex, as you can see from my lovely scissors here. We'll give you a close-up of this or a better picture of it at some point. But what you're cut off from, it's a biochemical cutoff from the prefrontal cortex. And so that's where most of our clear thinking happens, where, like Joe said, you're able to have empathy or mirror or see and feel what other people think. It's where all new data comes in. So we're not really even like seeing what's happening in this moment with our partner or with our kids. So we don't have the clear thinking. We can't be creative, and we don't have the new data. And so that's a pretty severe handicap. And at the same time, this is a system that we're all wired with.
For good reason.
Got us to here now. Like the human race is still here somehow.
Right.
But so when you're cut off from the prefrontal cortex, what we're wired to do to survive in a threat situation is try and simplify it. So our thinking is going to go into kind of black and white. You'll hear yourself saying and you'll see yourself thinking,
you never,
and
you always.
Yeah. So you got always and never going on. Those are like great. Like, I mean, it's embarrassing how much that stuff comes up for all of us,
Yeah.
And so black and white thinking happens. We're really going to want to solve this right now. I kind of think of this solve it right now as a pressure to solve because it seems like if you don't solve the threat right now, you're going to die, right? If you don't escape that tiger, you're going to die. If your girlfriend really does leave you, you're going to die. It's like it's all going into the same bucket. So there's black and white thinking, a pressure to solve, and then to really simplify things, we really want to come up with somebody to blame. And this goes in different phases, but we're going to choose, is it my fault and am I a horrible asshole, Or is it your fault and you always do these wrong things to me and I'm a victim? It doesn't really matter if you blame self or others, but just another thing to witness as things come up. This threat monitoring system also has the amygdala, and so the amygdala is going to kind of overhelp you and run and gather all the memories that feel the same way as the thing that's happening right now. So here in the amygdala, you also have the history and this kind of flood of data and memories. And so what you might be starting to feel and notice about even this simple model is it's somewhat overwhelming. And that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, the brain's totally overwhelmed.
When you're flipped, you're overwhelmed, you know, you got the big O face. And, you know, to further help you escape from the tiger and survive, we're having adrenaline. Oh, that's awesome. And cortisol released into our body and our brain. And so the adrenaline is like, you know, drinking a couple of Monster Energy drinks. And the cortisol is to regulate the nervous system and help to dull the pain. And so, you know, just witnessing how we're all wired, what happens when we flip our lid, is this a good moment to solve it right now?
Right. What we're basically, this pressure to solve, it's not that we can't think when we're triggered. It's just that we're not coming up with any new ideas.
Right.
We're basically using the old model of information that we learned growing up, typically.
Right.
So I work with a lot of parents, and so parents often revert back to how they were parented, much to their own not delight, because a lot of folks don't feel like they necessarily had the best parenting. And so they revert back to that old strategy, which usually is punishments and escalating removal of things that kids value, and then there's this back and forth, and so it doesn't seem to work. Well, the problem is when we cannot learn new tricks if the prefrontal cortex isn't engaged. It's the conductor of the orchestra. It makes everything.
Yeah.
So if with no learning we get stuck in these patterns where the same dance goes on over and over again, it's like, why isn't such and such getting this? Well, the reason is you can't learn with your lid flipped. So
Right.
it becomes absolutely critical before you do anything else to get your lid unflipped. And then actual learning can happen. And when I'm talking about parenting, I always tell parents you gotta connect to correct. And we can't connect when we're flooded and our lid's flipped.
Right.
So we got to get ourselves calm first before we can then connect with our kids or our spouse or a partner. Then we can correct the problem or fix it and come up with new strategies.
Yeah, and so Jane Nelson's flipping the lid video is great because she does a really good model too of how you might say this to a kid and how you might model kind of taking care of yourself even in the face of a kid not wanting to, go chill out or do something to help themselves feel better. It's really important to model that behavior as adults of being the one to go feel better. At the same time, we're going to run into this classic attachment pattern where some people are more ready to leave and flee than other people who want to
fight,
embrace
flight,
and hug,
freeze, right? Yes.
or fight it out, and approach the other person. And so for the person that's going to move away, typically men, this is my number one go-to in a crisis, it's really important too, and it's been really helpful in my relationships to check in and say, hey, my lid is flipped. I'm not going to say or do anything really awesome right now. I actually don't want to say the junk coming into my head. And so I'm going to go away and take care of myself for 30 minutes, an hour, or I'm just going to go to sleep and let's talk about this in the morning. Can you have an agreement and a predetermined plan with your loved ones to, go to your corners, do something to take care of yourself, and then come back to address the issue?
Right.
You don't want to just abandon your loved ones because you're taking care of yourself. And so we'll talk more about what you actually do and how you notice this and have a plan for it in one of our next segments.
Absolutely. These are things that we can teach ourselves in advance to do when we're in this black and white place. we have to sort of figure this stuff out in advance. So when we get triggered and we flip our lid, that first of all we even know that our lid is flipped,
Yeah.
because that's a skill all in itself,
And it's embarrassing.
and it's embarrassing.
It
And then
happens to everybody.
to own it.
Yeah.
But once we know it's there, then we have hopefully a plan in place about how to deal with it. And like Justice said, future videos we'll talk a lot more about that. But for really good information, you can, when it comes to parenting, you can read any positive discipline parenting book.
Right.
Those are classic, and they are very much compatible with what we're talking about here today.
For sure. So hopefully this is helpful, and make sure to kind of look at this as a long conversation where you come back and review this data with your family, with your loved ones, and just kind of see how it plays out for you. Let us know if this was helpful. Check out Mystic and the Mechanic on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll see you soon.